Hello, it's me, Mike, with HPDS. I'm going to go ahead and get started with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. May your kingdom come. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Please give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us of our debts, as we forgive those in debt to us. And Lord, lead us not into temptation, but rather deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom of power and glory, Lord, forever and ever. Amen. All right, it looks like what's gonna be going on today is I'm gonna go ahead and do a Genesis chapter 12 and 13 study. So what I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and show you a little. I guess it's a little presentation type deal that I make, and I'm just gonna go ahead and see how that goes. And it's kind of an interactive little video game. It's what's known as, I guess, a visual novel of some sort. Let me go ahead and bring that up, and let me get this going. So, hello, and let's get chapter 12 started. You can probably hear me. Probably hear it over some music, so hopefully the music isn't too loud. This chapter can be broken into three parts. The Lord's call to Abram. Abram travels to the land of Canaan. Abram travels to Egypt. This is again chapter 12 of Genesis. Verses 1 through 4, the Lord's call to Abram. The Lord instructs Abram to leave his father's house as well as his own home country. The Lord proclaims that he will make of Abram a great nation and make him a blessing. Because of this, Abram leaves his home country. Then we've got verses 5 through 10. Abram travels to the land of Canaan. Abram takes his wife, his nephew, and everything they had and go into the land of Canaan. As Abram is traveling through the country, the Lord appears to Abram. The Lord tells Abram that he will give the land to Abram's seed. Abram builds an altar on a mountain on the east side of Bethel. Abram continues his journeys and heads to Egypt during a famine. And then in verses 11 through 20, we'll find that Abram travels to Egypt, where Abram's wife Sarai was very beautiful. Because of this, the couple had to lie about the relationship for fear of the Egyptians killing Abram in order to take her. Abram and Sarai were also half-siblings. They had the same father but different mothers. Abram tells the Egyptians that Sarai was his sister but nothing more. Eventually, Sarai's beauty attracts the attention of royalty, and she is taken into Pharaoh's house. The Pharaoh begins to treat Abram very well for Sarah's sake. However, the Lord begins to plague the Pharaoh because Pharaoh was pursuing a married woman. The Pharaoh confronts Abram, who finally confesses that Sarai is his wife. Abram and his people are then sent away with all that they had acquired in Egypt. So here, you can actually see a map of the Abram that Abram had traveled with his father, Terah. Genesis chapter 11:31 tells us, "And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran." So you can see this is where they start, and this is Haran, so this is Ur of the Chaldees, and they dwelt there. So you can see there he goes out to Haran. The Lord calls Abram out of his father's household beginning in Genesis 12. Genesis 12:4 says, "So Abram departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran." So, Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran to travel to the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan is down here. So from Haran, Abram finds himself in Shechem, where he sees the Lord and makes an altar. Genesis 12:6 through 7 reads, "And Abram passed through the land unto the place of Shechem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. But this wasn't the only altar that Abram built for the Lord. We read in the very next verse, from Canaan, Abram travels into Egypt. In Egypt, Abram will learn a very interesting lesson. In Egypt, Abram learns the value of a beautiful woman, which I'll be discussing after I read the chapters. Genesis 12:11 through 16 tells the story. And here it is, 11. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife. And they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. And it came to pass that when Abram was come into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair. The princes also of Pharaoh saw her, and commended her before Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he entreated Abram well for her sake. And he had sheep and oxen and he-asses, and men servants and maid servants, and she-asses and camels. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh in his house with, I think I skipped a whole little section. Oh well. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh in his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Why saidst thou, She is my sister, so I might have taken her to me to wife? Now therefore behold thy wife, take her, and go thy way. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away, and his wife, and all that he had. That's Genesis 12:17 through 20. So now, and then we'll see, so just keep that all in mind. That's stuff that we'll see in chapter 12. And into chapter 12, we're going to see what this guy says. Well, hello there. Let's discuss Genesis 13. Abram left Egypt as a very wealthy man. Lot, too, had become wealthy in Egypt. Together their substance was too great and led to strife. So yeah, let me go ahead and read through chapter 12. You can see my screen here. Make sure that's still going on. Yep. Excuse me. Okay. Here's chapter 12, and I'm going to read the King James Version, which is pretty much a good version. It's a standard version. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. And into the land of Canaan they came, and Abram passed through the land unto the place of Sichem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram, and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him. And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east side of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west, and high on the east. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south, and there was a famine in the land. And Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Behold, therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife. and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. And it came to pass that when Abram was come into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman that she was very fair. The princess also of Pharaoh saw her, and commended her before Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he entreated Abram well for her sake. And she had sheep and oxen, and he asses, and men servants, and maidservants, and she asses, and camels. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh, and his house was with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Why saidst thou, She is my sister, so I might have taken her to me to wife? Now therefore behold thy wife, take her, and go thy way. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away, and his wife, and all that he had. So again, going through chapter 12, as you saw that here they are. Here he is getting the call from the Lord. Abram is being spoken by the Lord, and the Lord is telling him to leave his father's house. And he was out there, and let me go ahead and pull up some of these maps. So yeah, here's Abram's travel. And so this is where they start out, him and his father. And this is, again, at the end of chapter 11, we read about his father, Terah. And they go all the way up to Haran, where you see it says Terah and Abram traveled to Haran. And Abram travels to Canaan all by himself after this. He leaves. And yeah, he's 75 years old when he leaves. Right here it tells us in 12:4 he was 75 years old. But remember, and we will find later on, if we go back to Genesis 11, we remember that the people started living shorter and shorter time. They lived and then they died. They lived and they died. So the brothers, and that's what we're talking about, how Shem, even though it was Shem's brother Ham's line that was turning into these great, the mighty men, and we read about the Tower of Babel, and it was Ham's line doing this, but it was Shem's line that we see their age is getting younger and younger. Here he goes 500 years, and then the next one's living only to 403 years, and then the 209 years. And we see that if we go down to Terah, we find that Terah dies at, how old was he? Like 205 years. And the days of Terah were 205 years. And Terah died in Haran. So so we see, you will find that that's something particular to watch out, that Abram doesn't even get to 205 years old. But he was still pretty old. He was 75 years old when he finally departed out of Haran. So he was only 75 years when he finally left the company of his own father. So that's how old these people used to live, that he was 75 years old and he was still a child. So that's interesting to keep in mind. But here we are. They go. Abram took Sarah, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son. So just like I said, they go, they travel, and then we find that he makes two different altars. He makes one out here in Shechem, right? And he builded an altar there. And then he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel. And in between Bethel and Hai or something. You can't actually see it on this screen, on this map. So I think the map I can see it on is this map, maybe? No, not this one. This one, I think, is the one. Yeah, if you take a look at this map, you can see that Shechem is right here. So that's that same spot. From there, he goes down to Bethel in between Hai. So that Ai is the same spot. So Bethel has a different name eventually. But here he is where they are. Um, so this is where he's at. So he came from way up over here. He comes all the way down here. He sees the Lord. He builds an altar there in Shechem. Comes down to here. Builds another altar there. Let's see. And that's when he still keeps going south. And then finally there's a famine in the land. And finally he just goes down into Egypt. And as we see Egypt, we don't see Egypt on this map, but we do see Egypt. He comes down here and he finally comes into Egypt. And so Egypt is where we find Abram, and there Abram is going to get really rich, and it is something to keep in mind that he ends up, it's kind of like a retelling. If you think about it, you have to compare it, or you should compare Abram and Sarai with Adam and Eve, because Abram is going to be the father of, the promise ultimately, and it's through faith. We'll find out later in the Bible that we're given the promise through faith, and that Abram was credited because of his faith. And we'll see that basically he's got the same problem going on. He's married to his sister over here, and we'll find later on that also is a sin later on. And once again, remember that God is slowly kind of introducing the law to people. So Abram still doesn't technically know that being with his sister Sarai as his wife is a sin. I mean, that's something that the Jews are told when they're given the law, when Moses gives them the law several hundred years later, something like 400 years later. Well, more than that, more than 400 years later. But they're told that you're not supposed to sleep with your sister, and that's something that. So he's also, if you think about it, they're eating of that forbidden fruit, and it's not the same forbidden fruit as in that Adam and Eve ate of, but we are on the tail end of Genesis 11, when we got that Tower of Babel. And so everybody was just starting to speak different languages after this time. So it's very relatively the same, that forbidden fruit, and it's still considered today. There's got words for it. It's forbidden, taboo, things along those nature for these ancestral relationships that these early people had to deal with. I mean, that's what they dealt with, because I guess that's just, they didn't know any better. They still hadn't known any better. The God had not given them hadn't fully given them the law like we have today. So we now have the benefit of knowing that these ancestral relationships are sinful and wicked, and obviously wrong. But Abram was still on his journey with God, and he was paying the price too. We'll find that Sarai can't have any children, or she was very barren for most of her life. But nonetheless, she was very pretty, and that means a lot. Like, she in particular, she's gonna be the root of Abram's wealth that we'll see here, because when they get into let's see where we are. Here we are building an altar, and then he still goes south, and then he goes into Egypt. And so when he's getting close to Egypt, as you can tell, it's when he's getting close to Egypt that Abram says, "Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon." So now he's really starting to understand how beautiful she is. She's so beautiful that people are trying to have her, and he's afraid that they're gonna try to kill him so that they could have her. He's saying, "Oh, these Egyptians, look at them." It must have been something about how the Egyptians acted as well, though. He clearly wasn't saying this in the land of Canaan, and he wasn't afraid of it back in Haran. But as he's getting close to Egypt, he's starting to realize that there's something about these Egyptians that they just might kill him for her. And so here it is that, "Thou art my sister." So go ahead and tell them that we're brother and sister. And it's because of this, the Egyptians, oh yeah, they see her. Even the Pharaoh sees her. She's very beautiful. She's worth a lot of money as a beautiful woman. Just by virtue of being a beautiful woman, we should understand and take it and realize that that is worth a lot. Just being a beautiful woman. That's what the Bible's even showing us right here. And again, comparing it to like Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve didn't make mention of any of that. And I mean, if we think Sarah is beautiful, I imagine Eve was far more beautiful because she was made by God Himself, and made it. So, but that's just, Adam. But remember when Adam and when God confronts Adam about the fruit, what does He say back in Genesis 3 when it happened? He says, "Oh, the woman that you put here, she ate of it, and she made me eat," and so forth. And he didn't realize how much, what she was worth. He was just putting all the blame on her. And of course, when they get expelled from the garden, you'll find that, they come out cursed. I mean, they have nothing. God has to clothe them. They've got nothing. But meanwhile, Abram, with his faith and with God's promise, God has made a promise to him already. He's gonna make him into a seed, and he's gonna. What's he said at the very beginning? I will make thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and I will make. So he's telling Abram, I'm gonna bless you. So we got the same kind of situation where there's some sort of forbidden fruit situation, and Adam and Eve got expelled, and so here we have Abram and Sarai also getting expelled, because after Pharaoh sees God starts plaguing the Pharaoh to make sure that Abram and Sarai stay close and married and safe, even though they're in a foreign land here. But when Pharaoh finally finds out, Pharaoh commanded his men concerning Abram, and they sent him away. So he's getting sent away also, but he's not getting sent away from God. He's being sent away from men, from Egypt in particular. And he's blessed. So we see the differences, that striking difference between Adam and Eve and Abram and Sarah, even though they're kind of it's two different circumstances. It's kind of the same situation where they're being expelled from a promised land type situation. And one, Adam and Eve are cursed, but Abram and Sarai are blessed. They're so blessed, in fact, that we enter into Genesis 13. Genesis 13 right away tells us Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. So I'm going to go ahead and get into chapter 13. I'm going to go ahead and read this little game that I did. Just like I did with chapter 12, here's chapter 13. I'm going to continue forward with it. It says, well, hello there. Let's discuss Genesis 13. Abram left Egypt as a very wealthy man. Lot too had become wealthy in Egypt. Together their substance was too great and led to strife. Abram's story continues as he travels out of Egypt. Genesis 13 tells us immediately that Abram was rich at this point. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. This wealth had become so substantial between Abram and Lot that strife broke out between their herdsmen. Let's divide the chapter into parts. So we've got verses 1 through 9, which is Abram and Lot return from Egypt and agree to separate. So that's what we'll notice in verses 1 through 9. And in verses 10 through 13, we'll see that Lot goes to Sodom. And verses 14 through 18 will end the chapter with God renewing his promise to Abram. So verses 1 through 9, we'll see that Abram and Lot returned from Egypt and agreed to separate. Abram was very rich in cattle and silver and in gold. Abram returns to Bethel, where he had built an altar to the Lord, so he returns to that Bethel place. But Lot also had flocks and herds and tents, we're told. There was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle. And Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, and I pray thee, from me. And so verses 10 through 13, we find Lot going to Sodom. And Abram actually gives Lot first choice of the land. Lot beheld all the plain of Jordan and chose it for himself. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, while Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain and pitched his tents towards Sodom. The men of Sodom are acknowledged to be wicked and great sinners before the Lord. And verses 14 through 18, we'll find God renewing his promise to Abram that he promised him basically at the beginning of chapter 12 with his proclamation of what he's going to do. So after Lot was separated from Abram, the Lord promises him that Abram's seed will inherit the land of Canaan around him. The promise is for Abram's seed, and the Lord promises that Abram's seed would be as numerous as the dust of the earth. The Lord instructs Abram to walk through the length and breadth of the land because it was being given to him. And Abram eventually comes to the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and there builds another altar unto the Lord. And that's that. So that's what we'll see coming up in Genesis 13. We'll basically see the introduction of what's going to be happening in chapter 14 and later on, especially with Sodom and Gomorrah. But right now we've got Abram and Lot separating, and after they separate, God comes back to Abram and just basically renews his promise. So and Abram went out of Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. And he went on his journeys from the south, even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai, and unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest into Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves, the one from the other. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Then Abram removed his tent, and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. So here we are again. Basically, he comes out of Egypt back into Bethel, where he was at the beginning, and then he finds himself in Hebron. So let me see. I think that other one was this one. So here we are again. Yeah, he comes out of Egypt, so he traveled somewhere around here, and he comes back up to Bethel, where he had been in the first place, right here. and then he kind of retreats back down into this plain of Mamre, somewhere that is in Hebron, which is right there as we see. So it's kind of south of where he's been. He's still kind of, apparently there looks like there's this mountain range kind of, maybe some hill area that kind of cuts through here, and that's where he's clear. That's where he's at. He's up there looking at the land, and he's walking the breadth of the land, the length of the width. So that's what he's doing, and he built there an altar unto the Lord. There he builds another altar. So this is the third altar that we know of. But yeah, here we see again, like I said, 1 through 9. Where basically Lot and Abram are separating. They're so rich between the two of them. Once again, all that money comes from, really comes from God, but the basis of this was the beauty of Sarai. That's how beautiful Sarai was, that she basically made them all that money because of how beautiful she was and how well people treated him because they were trying to marry her down in Egypt. But of course, he has to leave, and he comes out here, and all that money is causing problems between Abram's peoples and Lot's people, and so Abram goes ahead and says, "Let's separate," and you go ahead and gives Lot first choice, and I guess Lot here, he makes his first big mistake. He goes towards Sodom, and he goes into that plain of Jordan, and you see right here. What does he say? And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. So you see that, we'll see too. Let's take a look at Sodom and Gomorrah. Let's see, right here we hear about it. Area of Sodom and Gomorrah. So that Jordan, plain of Jordan, is somewhere around here. But they were up here looking at everything, and he decides to go down to here. This is where he wants to be. Let me see if I can't actually find another one. These are probably right here: Sodom, Gomorrah, Zoar, and we see here's that Bethel, Shechem, Ai, Hebron. There's that Mamre. So he's down here at this Salt Sea, and we'll find later on the great story that happened between Sodom and Gomorrah. But that's where Lot goes to hang out, and he spends time there. Whereas, as we say, we got Abram goes and retreats into that Hebron place. And while he's there, that's where the God tells him, and he renews the promise. And he says, "For the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever." That's his promise that he's renewing. "And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered." And he's telling him, you're gonna have a lot of ancestors. You're gonna seed. There's a lot of nations, a lot of people, and that was the promise that he's still fulfilling today. That the Lord is still fulfilling to Abraham. And yeah, he tells Abraham to basically walk the land of Canaan. And mind you, that the land of Canaan is still filled with the great men that come from Ham's line, that comes from Cush. Basically, remember that Canaan was cursed, and those people ended up becoming giants. Nimrod was a giant. He was a mighty man. He became a mighty man, which is basically he started becoming a giant. And so keep that in mind, that in the next chapter, when we get to chapter 14, we'll find that Abram is living amongst these giants. And we'll find when we get to after the Exodus, we find that the reason why Moses and the Israelites get stuck out there for 40 years is because they come into the land of Canaan, which Abram did no problem. Abram had no problem doing this, walking amongst giants. But the Jews, the Israelites, then the sons of Abraham, when they get into Canaan, they see the giants, and I mean they're scared. Only Joshua and the other guy, I forget the other guy's name. Joshua is the only one that really says. There's two of them that says, "Oh yeah, we could do it. With God's help, we can do it. We can kill the giants." But for the most part, the Israel did not want to do it, and because of that, well, they get stuck in the desert for 40 years. Not like Abraham got stuck in the desert. Abraham had no problem going in and out, and he was a very wealthy man too. So really, that's another reason why they get stuck out there. They had no excuse. No excuse. With God's help, they could have done it all. They could have done anything. But yeah, so I guess that is chapter 12 and 13 of Genesis. And yeah, I made this little, like I said, I made that little video, that little game, but the little visual novel, and I'm gonna plan to make some more of those to help me. They're like little presentations, but yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and end this video. I pray we bless Jesus Christ. May we all bless Jesus Christ, and may He bless all of us. Amen.